What's going on YouTube? My name is GinJTCG or Chris, and today I'm back with another video of Master the Meta. And today we're looking at a more meta like fringe deck, Tera Box. Now Tera Box has been tearing it up over the past couple weeks. I think it's been having some really solid online results and kind of still in that rogue category, which you guys know is my favorite type of deck to play. So if you're looking for a deck that is amazing on the come up, stay tuned for this whole video. Over the course of today's video, I'm not going to be doing the usual, talk about the deck for 5 minutes and then play 3 matches and see if I can actually not misplay for once in my life. I'm going to be doing a much more in-depth breakdown on today's Master the Meta video, where I'm not just going to be focusing on like the deck list and talking about all 60 cards and why I'm playing these 60, but I'm going to be focusing on like different tech cards and different options this deck has. After talking about the deck and different ways we could play Tera Box, I'm going to be moving into a matchup spread where I've created a visual graphic for a matchup chart right now based on the current top 15 most played decks and how it swings into those. Based off of that, I will be going even more in depth into the top 5 most popular decks to talk about the strategies needed to take down the top 5. After we close out from dominating the top 5 decks, I will be giving this deck a master ranking out of 10. I have come up with 7 categories to rate Tera Box on, and we will cover all of the 7 categories to see if this is the play for you at your next tournament. So without wasting any more time, let's hop into the deck archetype for Tera Box. Now, looking at this initially, I feel like, at least for me, it was definitely very overwhelming. There is a ton of one-ofs, and my initial thought when I see a deck with like 80 one-ofs is like, okay, how do we piece this together? You know what I mean? Like, I've got to slow this down, make sure that we're analyzing every card in this deck, the synergy, and if it really feels like there's a lot of one-ofs, or if we're just staring at a lot of optimal attackers into different lines. So to make this as digestible as possible, I want to first talk about the engine for this deck, or how this deck is going to run and how we're going to make sure we're playing it as consistently as humanly possible. We are going to be playing a 4-4 line of the Noctowl engine, with the Hootoots having 70 and 80 HP, which I'll talk about in a second, and Noctowl having 100 HP. You are a solid single prize engine that you can search out consistently and get into play to draw out your whole deck. With the Jewel Seeker ability, as long as you have a Tera Pokemon in play, which we have plenty of at pretty much all moments, you can search your deck for 2 trainer cards, so you can basically hand pick whatever is needed to dig you out of the situation you're in and put you ahead of your opponent. Now, to make sure that we're getting these set up, this deck actually does like going first because we are also playing 2 copies of Fan Rotom. With the Fan Call ability, once during your turn, you can search your deck for up to 3 Pokemon that are normal type and have 100 HP or less. So essentially, you could go double Hoothoot Noctowl, depending on what else is in your hand. Another amazing card to pull off the Fan Rotom is actually the single prize Ditto, which I'm putting in the engine category as well, with Transformative Start, where if this Pokemon is in the active spot at the start of your turn, you actually can discard it and replace it with a basic Pokemon in your deck. So if you need to go in and get a Wellspring Ogerpon for a certain matchup, a Lillie's Clefairy, a Pikachu EX, you could just cherry pick that off the Ditto on your first turn and get the early energy accelerated to it from the manual attachment. So Ditto, Fan Rotom, and Noctowl are huge on that first turn. Obviously, of course, Noctowl is going to be coming down a little bit later after the first turn and kind of carry you through the rest of the game, but that doesn't mean it's not important to grab initially. When we're talking about further consistency in the deck, we are going to be looking at cards like Latias with the Skyliner ability, giving all of our basic Pokemon, which is our entire deck except for Noctowl, a free retreat. So if we need to pivot something out of the active spot, even if it's a Bloodmoon Ursaluna to go in with a Ditto turn 1, we can do so by playing a Nest Ball or Ultra Ball to pull out our Latias. Fezandipiti with Flip the Script is going to be huge and function as our draw engine alongside Mew EX, with Flip the Script allowing us to draw 3 cards after one of our Pokemon being KO'd, and Mew EX having the restart ability to draw up to 3 cards into our hand once during your turn. You could actually come up with some pretty solid hand sizes and some solid plays with these 2 cards in tandem. Now, we do have Area 0 Underdepth, so while these are prize liabilities, we can get rid of them off the bench. But remember, when you're playing this deck, you don't care about playing a Mew EX, which only has 180 HP, because everything in your deck has very low amounts of HP for 2 prize cards. So that's not something you're totally worried about. You're kind of just trying to go this speed route and take over your opponent before they know how to respond to your deck. Now, as we get into a little bit more consistency in the deck, we have the Teal Mask Ogerpon EX. With the Teal Dance ability, we can attach a grass energy from our hand, and we play the most grass energy to draw an extra card. So Teal Mask Ogerpon functions not only as a great efficient draw engine, since we're only playing the one of, but it also transitioned us to talking about different attackers in the deck. With Myriad Leaf Shower, we do 30 damage plus 30 more for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. So damage done to this Pokemon from anything that's not a normal type. So if your opponent is playing Raging Bolt, the only thing that could effectively attack Terapagos at this point is going to legitimately be a Hoothoot, Noctowl, Fan Rotom, or Bloodmoon Ursaluna. So Terapagos has insane tank potential in some of those EX matchups, which are a little bit harder for this deck. So falling back on Terapagos does work very well. Now, I just want everyone to keep in mind, if you're using Terapagos and you're going for the Crown Opal, always make sure to try to set up Pokemon in the back end, such as maybe a Pikachu or a Lillie's Clefairy, because all your opponent has to do is go Prime Catcher and Boss's Orders to put Terapagos back onto the bench, and then play the Boss's Orders to bring it back up to the active spot, and then the effect is reset and you don't have that protection anymore. So if you're putting your heart and soul into Terapagos, that can fall short because many of those decks do play Prime Catcher as their ace spec, or at least play copies of Counter Catcher, so once they fall behind, they could do the same Gusting Loop and reset the Terapagos. Getting into the next attacker, and the main attacker in this deck is probably going to be the Wellspring Ogerpon EX. This is a card that not many people are respecting at all, since many are opting to cut the Shaman with the, downplay of EX bench sniping Pokemon in the format, which means Torrential Pump is so powerful to take down some of the top decks, because many of them rely on evolving. So now you can swing for 100 on the active and then another 120 on the bench. So if you could go first against Golden Go, you could take out 2 Gimme Ghouls with this. You could even snipe a Genesect and a Joltik in Joltik Box. If you're up against Dragapult, Dusknoir, you could take out any combination of 2 Dreepies and 2 Duskulls, or any 1/1 combination of them. You've got a lot of potential when we're talking about Wellspring Ogerpon. And not only that, but we also do still have the Saw block, where we just stop our opponent's active Pokemon from retreating. So if we need to buy a little bit of time, we could easily go in with Sob and start locking an opponent up while we get some extra energy into play, or we set up another Pokemon that's going to take down the rest of the match. Getting into the next attacker, we do have Lillie's Clefairy EX, which makes all Dragon-type Pokemon have a Psychic weakness, allowing for Lillie's Clefairy and Mew EX to be insane attackers. If absolutely needed, we still do play 2 copies of the Psychic Energy, so even Latias EX with Eon Blade could get after it and swing for 400 damage onto a Dragapult or Raging Bolt. These 3 Psychic-type attackers are going to be huge, since 2 of the top 5 decks right now are Dragapult, Dusknoir, and Raging Bolt, and that's not to talk about how Dragapult, Charizard, and just pure Dragapult are still top decks. So overall, having this little Psychic package within your deck functions super well. Now, the next attacker I want to talk about is Pikachu EX. With Resolute Heart, this Pokemon does not get one shot from any attack in particular, because if it's full HP, you actually do just survive with 10. So that means if your opponent is going in with Raging Bolt and discarding 3 energy for 210 damage, you still live with 10. The only way around that is if they play a Monkey Dory on the same turn, which decks like Gardevoir or maybe a Grimmsnarl can pull off very effectively, but that also means that this is not the optimal attacker in those matchups, so you're not worrying about it too much. Pikachu EX does have a very costly attack, Topaz Bolt, where you discard 3 energy attached to this Pokemon, and you've got 3 different energy attack costs, but you also swing for 300 damage. So if you can utilize Sparkling Crystal on Pikachu efficiently, you can still pull off this attack for just 2 energy and loop it twice. So, that is the situation where you kind of want to bring the ace spec into play to get even greater value out of your Pikachu and aim to take 4 prize cards with it. Iron Bundle is a card I do want to spend a second talking about, because there are some interesting plays that we can use the Iron Bundle for, which I'll get more into in the matchup spread. Of course, you have the Hyper Blower, where you function as a Pseudo Gust, and maybe your opponent's active Pokemon is just annoying, you don't want to deal with it right now, and that's fine. I mean, that's very understandable, that's why we play it. But you also have the Refrigerated Steam attack, where you do 80 damage, and if your opponent's active Pokemon is an evolution Pokemon, it can attack during its next turn. So you also have a rather insane attack on this Pokemon that that you can use if push comes to absolute shove and you need to get live with an Iron Bundle. So I really do like the inclusion of the bundle. I think this is a necessity in this deck. So, and the reason I want to spend some time saying that is there are some decks that can wall this out pretty well, and using Iron Bundle really does help a lot. And not only that, but just having that Hyper Blower ability on the bench saves this deck a ton, especially when you're using Wellspring Ogerpon to ping different bench Pokemon, because many times there'll be a tanky Pokemon in the active spot you can't deal with, but if you look at their entire bench, you could kind of take an extra prize card because nothing can survive that 100 base damage from the Torrential Pump. So Iron Bundle is a card in this deck I would say is rather uncuttable, whereas in many other lists that opt to run it, it is a card you can 100% not utilize. And, you know, if you need that extra space, you could totally, you know, cut the bundle, play whatever card you're thinking about. In this deck, I don't really think that's an option. Now, Bloodmoon Ursaluna is, I believe, the last Pokemon we're staring at in the 60. With the Season Skill ability, the attack cost of Bloodmoon goes down 1 energy for every prize card your opponent's taken. So its base damage is 240, and of course this gets cheaper and cheaper as the game goes on, making Bloodmoon Ursaluna a phenomenal backup attacker, both because you can one-shot pretty much any basic EX in the game, except for itself, but also it becomes even cheaper as the game goes on, and something this deck does have a little bit of trouble with in the end game is energy acceleration, especially if you played your Crispins and Sparkling Crystals. So utilizing the Bloodmoon in the late game will always be super nice. Now, time to take transition, and I want to jump into the trainer count for this deck because my gosh, there's a lot going on. And I feel like when you kind of split up the trainer's function, you see that many trainers offer a very similar function. They just have slightly different effects, which allow this deck's power level to go up, but obviously makes the skill needed to see these lines go a little bit harder. So I want to break it down at the core level and just talk about the consistency supporters first. Those are going to be the 4 Crispin, the 1 Iono, and the 1 Professor's Research. While there's only 6 supporters that, you know, function for consistency in this deck, that doesn't make it not consistent because we have Noctowl to cherry pick them at all moments, and you really don't need more than that. Since Crispin is going to be the supporter you use like 8 times out of 10 or so in this deck, having only 1 copy of Iono and 1 copy of Research to get you out of a really difficult situation or knock your opponent's hand down to a very small size in the late game is really all that's necessary. Crispin will allow you to get the different types of energy just picked right out of your deck and attached to your Pokemon to pull off huge attacks, and then Iono and Research will draw you a bigger hand, but also disrupt your opponent's hand size a bit. Using Crispin every single turn is going to be the optimal line so many times in this deck, because again, energy acceleration is very difficult. So if you're using attacks like Torrential Pump or Topaz Bolt on the Wellspring Ogerpon or Pikachu EX, you are going to be losing the energy after the attack, whether it goes into your deck or discard pile, so using Crispin every turn will allow this to feel less impactful and hurt you more than it would help you. I want to move on to some of the power supporter cards in this deck, which are represented by Boss's Orders, Professor Turo Scenario, and Briar. Now, Boss's Orders we do know as our lovely Gust card, allowing us to 2-4-6 our opponent every chance we get. Professor Turo Scenario does allow you to full heal Pokemon like Pikachu EX, but more importantly allows you to reset a Noctowl. So let's say on your bench you have 2 Hootoots, or 1 Hoothoot and 1 Noctowl, and you played the Noctowl last turn, you've got, you know, a bit of a dead hand, but an Energy Switch and a Counter Catcher can do great things for you this turn. Well, all you gotta do is play the Turo Scenario, picked up the Noctowl, and evolved the other Hoothoot into Noctowl, and then boom, you're good to go. And remember, there's still a Hoothoot in your hand, so you can just bench that and get that guy ready to evolve the following turn. So Turo will function as a full heal card, but also a way to reset your engine and make sure that you're consistently pulling off Noctowls. Briar is going to be the last card in this deck that is a supporter who allows for this deck's power level to just go through the absolute roof. You can only use a supporter if you have if your opponent has exactly 2 prize cards remaining, which is not very hard to do considering that pretty much every Pokemon in this deck that is worth KOing is worth 2 prize cards and not an insane amount of HP. And then once your opponent has 2 prize cards remaining, any Pokemon you KO with a Tera Pokemon, which remember, half this deck is Tera Pokemon, you take an extra prize card for it. So now if you're up against a single prize Pokemon, but you're able to set up the Teal Mask Ogerpon, you can use Briar on that last turn of the game and take the last 2 prizes that you ideally need to win at that point. So it allows you just to get a little cheeky 1-up on your opponent, depending on how, you know, the board state is left, and, you know, if you got a good Tera attacker you can use on a single prize Pokemon, or even a 2 prize Pokemon and take 3 prize cards. So the supporter count, again, it is running a little thin, but that's okay because we have Noctowls to make sure that we're utilizing all parts of it pretty much every turn of the game. Now, getting into the items, we see a lot more one of, so I do want to kind of lump some of these items together to give everyone a better understanding on why it's so efficient to use this item line. We have the 4 Nest Balls, 3 Ultra Balls, and 1 Tera Orb, which I want to talk about first. All of these items allow your deck to have 8 item Pokemon Search cards. Now, while the 1 Tera Orb is an interesting one of, since we have many one of Tera attackers, many matchups you only need 1 Tera Pokemon, and then you'd kind of want to just use Night Stretcher and Super Rod to recycle that guy and set it up consistently because it's going to dominate your opponent. So having 1 copy of Tera Orb is fine, whereas having 4 copies of Nest Ball and 3 copies of Ultra Ball also function very well because you want to just keep setting up Hootoots, Noctowls, Fan Rotoms, Latias, Fezes, Mews, you know, you guys get the point at this point. We want to make sure we can search out any Pokemon in our deck and not just our attacking Pokemon, because while having attacking Pokemon is great, it doesn't necessarily guarantee the win against our opponent unless we have the engine to back it. Now, when we get into some of the other items in our deck, we do have 2 Energy Switch and 1 Earthen Vessel, which help alongside Crispin as our energy acceleration engine. Earthen Vessel allows for that early turn 1 energy search, or, you know, in the mid game, hey, I need to get an energy in my hand because I just played a Super Rod and a Boss's Orders, and I need to make sure I'm attaching an energy to set myself up to attack this turn or get ready next turn. Boom, we got a Vessel, and if you're using Teal Mask Ogerpon, which you should because it's a great engine, and it allows you to use Energy Switch even better than any other deck, because now you can move a grass energy to another Pokemon with the copy of Energy Switch, and if you combo that with Crispin, well, I mean, now you got 3 energies set up in 1 turn. You got 1 off the Teal Dance, 2 off the Crispin, and you got all that on 1 Pokemon from an Energy Switch, so Energy Switch and Vessel will definitely help a ton. Now, we've only got 2 recovery cards in this deck, and honestly, I really don't think this deck needs more than the 2 recovery cards. We do have Night Stretcher and Rod. I think playing a 1-1 switch, 1-1 line in this deck is very appropriate, and I don't think you ever double down on 2-2 Night Stretcher and or 2-2 Rod. I think the 1-1 is very nice because oftentimes you want to go Night Stretcher for the Pokemon, but you do want to Super Rod a full 3 energy line back into your deck because this deck does have relatively finite amounts of energy. Now, the 1 counter catcher in this deck is very nice when you combo it with Iron Bundle and Boss, and although this deck does aim to 2-4-6 your opponent, we don't need 80 quadrillion copies of Boss in that deck to pull it off, because again, we're really just doubling down and making sure we could go Noctowl every single turn and just search it right out of our deck. So, you know, we're kind of lowering the amount of gust counts, but we're optimizing how often and how critical they are in this deck. 1 copy of Sparkling Crystal and 1 copy of Air Balloon are the only tools needed for this deck. The 1 Air Balloon is very nice just in case you prize the Latias, and the Sparkling Crystal is going to do wonders to make sure that you consistently pull off attacks from Wellspring, Ogerpon, and Pikachu EX, which are the biggest Tera Pokemon in the deck. But even putting it on Terapagos to use Crown Opal in a tough matchup can save you a ton of effort and allow you to consistently set up bench Pokemon. We've got 3 stadiums in this deck. I've talked about Area 0 Underdepths, and I think Area 0 Underdepths is the absolute best stadium in this deck by a long shot. Not only does it allow your Terapagos' Unified Beatdown to swing a little bit harder, but it also allows you to discard Pokemon from your bench when your opponent inevitably bumps the stadium, which takes away liabilities, but also could help you reset the Noctowl engine, because once you evolve into Noctowl, it is completely useless. So those extra 3 bench spaces that Area 0 Underdepths gives you also allow you to get your now dead engine off your board because it's not doing anything for you. And when it's in the discard pile, you always have the option to go Night Stretcher for a Noctowl and evolve a Hoothoot, or Rod and bring back a Hoothoot Noctowl energy line because, you know, you're in a tough spot in a game. So I think Area 0 Underdepths is without a doubt a absolute must include. I think 2 of is the minimum you should play, and I think the 1 Jamming Tower is something of a personal tech that I like in the current format right now, just because a lot of decks are really abusing tools, and we're seeing Dragapult use Jamming Tower to kind of counteract that. And I think, you know, since Guardy is a rough matchup, this is something that could obviously help against Gardevoir, but many decks are looking for the TM Evo type of play in the early game, or they're looking to go Air Balloon for Golden Go and just draw extra cards off coin bonus. So I think playing the 1 of Jamming Tower in the mid to late game in this deck could help a ton, just disrupt your opponent a little bit more, since it's going to be hard to pull off Iono and disrupt their hand any more than once per game, since, well, we don't play for copies of it. So I do like the Jamming Tower right now, and I think it's a very solid tech card to play in many decks if you have the ability to do so. Obviously, you're probably using your Sparkling Crystal in the early game, so I don't recommend playing Jamming Tower while your Crystal's down, because then your A-Spec is completely useless, but as long as you remember that the two kind of counteract each other and play around that, you should be fine. The energy count for this deck, I think, is the scariest part of this deck, with 4 Grass Energy, 2 Psychic Energy, 1 Water, 1 Electric, and 1 Metal. We are playing the world's thinnest energy line, while our attackers all need different energy costs, so prize checking in this deck is going to be absolutely essential, but remember, please do so in a timely manner, because no one wants to sit there while you're prize checking for 40 minutes. You not only need to check if your Pikachu EX is prized when you're playing against Golden Go, but you really want to make sure that you've got, your Electric Energy and your Metal Energy, since you only play 1 copy of them. And even though you play 2 copies of the Wellspring Ogerpon because it's that important, we do really only play 1 Water Energy. So, making sure that the different energy counts in your deck are not prized and you have access to them is going to be important, alongside making sure the Pokemon is in your deck. Now, while that rounds us out from the 60 that I think is pretty optimal to play for Tera Box, it does not really, talk about any of the different tech cards, so I do want to spend some time talking about those. And I think one of the most interesting lines that this deck could run, depending on the meta currently going on, you can use one of the Boosted Evolution Eevee, but also 1 copy of Flareon EX or Leafeon EX, which have very, very different functions and allow this deck to go insane against many different archetypes, depending on their popularity levels. When we're talking about Leafeon, you have Verdant Storm, so if there's a lot of decks that abuse the amount of energy in play, and not just discarding energy, such as Raging Bolt and Golden Go, Verdant Storm can swing for insane amounts of damage, doing 60 damage for each energy attached to all of your opponent's Pokemon. Now, more importantly than that, if we switch to include a single copy of a Fire Energy in this deck somewhere, we can use Moss Agate, where we do 230 damage, which is great 2-shot numbers against decks like Dragapult or anything that's beefier than your basic EXs, and you heal 130 damage from each of your bench Pokemon. So if a spread becomes a little bit more popular, specifically Grimmsnarl, you can now swing for Weakness KO on Grimmsnarl while full healing your entire bench 100 damage, which is probably more than is in any one spot unless something tanked to hit, and that kind of just allows you to waltz through that matchup. Now, Flareon EX is definitely for a different set of decks, with Cardinalian doing 280 damage and locking Flareon out from attacking. It does function as a massive OHKO Pokemon with a little bit more HP than the rest of your deck. Now, more importantly than that is the Burning Charge, where you can accelerate 2 basic energy from your deck and attach them to one of your Pokemon. While it only does 130 damage, it does set your deck up with the potential to get energy in play a little bit faster and take the pressure off of Crispin. So I think playing a 1-1 Flareon line is a solid consideration in this meta and just in general, because it does add a different level of consistency, but that is also a turn where you're not attacking for massive damage and you're not taking extra bench KOs like Wellspring Ogerpon, which attacks for a similar amount of damage. Leafeon is definitely the more particular about the two in terms of which you play depending on the meta. I think Flareon could fit in this deck almost at any time if you could find 2 spaces to move around for it, and I think the Leafeon only really should be considered if dark decks get insanely popular again, or we see the rise in spread decks such as Frostlass, Munkidori, Grimmsnarl, or Uxie Spread. Now, Buddy Buddy Poffin is another interesting item tech that some people have opted to include a 1 of or maybe a 2 of in this deck, just to help with that turn 1, getting out the Fan Rotom and the Hoothoot. Remember, Fan Rotom is an absolute must the first turn of the game, no matter what is going on, because that allows you to carry the momentum through that first turn and the rest of the game by giving you an early game, like Engine acceleration, but also giving you a good single prize attacker with Assault Landing if there's a Stadium in play, and again, you play 3 of them, so you could probably get one if your opponent doesn't. So I think a 1 of Buddy Buddy Poffin, maybe a 2 of, is kind of interesting. The one thing I worry about, though, is if you play the Buddy Buddy Poffin, you really do have to cut a Pokemon Search card, and I think having the Nest Balls, Ultra Balls, and Tera Orb is just so nice to get out the rest of your deck, and I don't know if Buddy Buddy Poffin will really add that level of consistency that I think people hopes it does, because you can just utilize Fan Rotom more efficiently in the first turn with the Pokemon Search we have. Glass Trumpet is the final tech card I would like to talk about, or final, item tech card I would like to talk about for this deck. I do have one more Pokemon I do want to talk about. And you can do this if you have any Tera Pokemon in play, which, remember, it's in our name, so that usually means we have it in play most times. You choose up to 2 of your bench normal-type Pokemon and attach a basic energy card from your discard pile to each of them. So basically, you can use this with Energy Switch instead of Teal Dance. By playing a one-of Glass Trumpet, you're able to accelerate energy even faster after a big KO, and this can help a ton if you're relying on the energy switches a lot more. Now, I think this creates a more intricate play, and maybe you should consider playing a couple more copies of Energy Switch in the deck if you play the Glass Trumpet, but I definitely could see the reasoning in including this as a one-of, especially if it's just to help out Bloodmoon Ursaluna in the late game, start attacking a little bit earlier. Now, the final tech card I want to talk about in this deck is the Iron Leaves EX, where you have the Rapid Vernier attack, and you can, when you play this Pokemon from your hand to your bench, you can just move it to the active spot along with any energy attached to your other Pokemon. So you can swing for 180 damage and OHKO any massive grass weak attackers such as Charizard EX or Grimmsnarl EX. So I think if the meta shifts to see those as the top dogs again, that's totally where we see the Leafeon or Iron Leaves come out. And in general, Flareon can always help with consistency in making sure that you're setting up and taking big OHKOs where you need them. So wrapping up the, overall deck list, I hope you guys learned a bit about the different tech cards and stuff and the different options and lines and all the different plays you have on your Pokemon. So we'll move on to talking about, how this deck operates into the top 15 decks, talk about the big attackers you want to, have preferenced into those matchups, and spend a little bit more time talking about the prize mapping and lines and counters and ways around the top 5 meta matchups, because those should be, depending on your locals or what level you're bringing this deck to, should be the matchups you see the most. So without further ado, let's hop into the matchup spread for this deck. Initially, it does look really solid. I mean, you've got a lot more auto win and good matchups than you do rough and auto loss matchups and your 50-50 matchups. While they are super popular decks, they're still 50-50, so you still have a good chance into them. Just at a glance, our auto wins, we got Ethan's Typhlosion and Zoroark and Raging Bull are good matchups. We've got Charizard Pidgeot, Crustle, and Joltik Box. Our 50-50 matchups is going to be a large bulk of the meta, represented by Flareon Box, Goldengo, Dragapult Dusknoir, Pure Dragapult, Goldengo Joltik, and Grimmsnarl. Our rough matchups are Dragapult, Charizard, and Guardy, and our one and only auto loss is really just Ethan's Ho-Oh with the Armarouge package. We spent an insane amount of time talking about the deck list, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about each of these matchups and really just talking about the best attackers into them, and I'll spend a little bit more talking about the different options into those top 5 decks before we move on to the master ranking for the day. When we're talking about Ethan's Typhlosion, this deck is an auto-win because we have a surprising amount of outs to deal with this single prize deck, despite being a predominantly 2-prize attacking deck when we look at Wellspring, Ogerpon, and Pikachu EX. Wellspring, Ogerpon allows us to take 2 KOs on different Cyndaquils or Quilavas and stop their engine and attacking Pokemon from fully setting up, and utilizing Pikachu EX with Resolute Heart means that their Typhlosion doesn't even one-shot our 2-prize attacker, so especially if we can attack first, we can get the edge over Typhlosion, securing us a very, very solid matchup into it. And Zoroark functions off a similar basis, where we actually use the same 2 Pokemon, but now we get the addition of the Teal Mask Ogerpon being viable as well, because they're a evolving deck, so you could use Wellspring Ogerpon in the early game. Pikachu can OHKO the Zoroark unless they have a rigid band attached, in which case you need a little bit extra oomph, but we can work around that with a good Boss's Orders or Iron Bundle play as we talked about. And then Teal Mask Ogerpon also swings for KO just because of their grass weakness. Raging Bull, we do have access to Crown Opal to lock out 90% of their deck, but we also have the Psychic Box, making those Dragon Pokemon very weak and allowing us to take 2 prize cards insanely, efficiently and very easily against their deck, which can give us the edge over them. For the good matchups, we have Charizard, Pidgeot, Crustle, and Joltik Box. Now, Charizard Pidgeot does have a 64% win rate, and I think feels very comfortably because, again, you are just going to be abusing the Wellspring Ogerpon into it, and you've got Teal Mask Ogerpon to use as your backup to take the big KO on the big Zard that they got in play. When we utilize some of the other Pokemon in this deck, such as Pikachu, we could get very close to KO on the Charizard, so more importantly than that, we want to go boss KO on the Pidgeot with the Pikachu, and make sure we take the 2 prize cards there, drop another 2 prize cards for ourselves by taking a KO on Teal Mask Ogerpon, and then in the very, very beginning of the game, taking 2 prize cards with some bench sniping from the Wellspring Mask Ogerpon to wrap up our Charizard matchup. Crustle, and pretty much any wall deck for that matter, gets absolutely bodied by the Iron Bundle. By utilizing Iron Bundle and stopping your opponent's active Crustle from attacking, they really can't do much against you, even if they're healing the damage constantly, because they're never going to deal with Bundle. So, by using this guy, they've got to pull off full retreat plays or switch plays and attack with different Crustles, and they don't have the energy to keep pulling that off consistently. So using your Iron Bundle and your Wellspring Ogerpon to get them before they evolve can be super, super helpful when you're up against this deck. Joltik Box is a solid matchup, you know, at a 55% win rate. We're definitely favored into it, but it's definitely a little bit closer. And I think that's really just because of our Noctowl engine. We can have a little bit more consistency, and we really don't mind going first or second, which can stop them, but also, you know, help set us up either way. And then we can utilize the same attackers, such as Pikachu EX and even the Wellspring Ogerpon, to take 2 prize cards on a Joltik and a single prize Genesect, which can give us an edge in a way that they can. Now, of course, they do have Iron Hands, which could take 2 prize cards on a Noctowl or 3 prize cards on a Teal, Wellspring Mask Ogerpon. So, you know, you gotta be careful around that, but as long as you can navigate that matchup and use different attackers, such as the Terapagos to lock out, again, like 90% of their deck, followed by Bloodmoon Ursaluna and a Pikachu KO, you could easily 2-4-6 this deck. The 50-50 matchups, we've got a lot more going on, and I will talk about 3 of them in a little bit, and those 3 are Gholdengo, Dragapult, Dusknoir, and Grimmsnarl, but we've got Flareon Box, Pure Dragapult, and Gholdengo Joltik. Flareon Box is going to be absolutely slaughtered by Pikachu EX because they really don't have the Monkey Dory spread consistently enough to work around Resolute Heart, and if they pull it off, that's fine. You can still take big KOs with stuff like Terapagos on some of their lower HP Pokemon, and they also might be playing the Wellspring Ogerpon as well, except you're a little less susceptible to it since you don't have that many EVs in play, while they probably have a couple and can't pull off their attackers. You know, their attacking evolutions as easily even if they have the boosted evolution EV. So Flareon Box you could walk through with a Wellspring Ogerpon and a Pikachu, similar to many of the other matchups. Dragapult, well, I mean, hey, we got the Psychic Box package, so if you're worried about some Dragon attackers, get your Clefairies and your Mews down, start swinging for Oko with the new weakness that Dragon-type Pokemon are up against. Gholdengo Joltik is a bit of a different match where Terapagos can't solo it like it can against Joltik Box, so you do need to utilize the Pikachu EX a little bit more with its Resolute Heart, since this deck really has no way around that, and you could kind of just walk through by taking 4 prize cards with it. So then if you could sneak out another 2 with the Wellspring Ogerpon or even a Bloodmoon Ursaluna, you can kind of walk away from that matchup, you know, pretty well. It's definitely slightly favored into them, but something that is definitely beatable nonetheless. You have the options to do it. We got the engine to make it happen. That deck could, depending on which line they lean into a little bit more, I think if they lean into the Gholdengo, we are feeling a little bit better, and if they lead into the Joltik Box, it's a little scarier because the Gholdengo pivot isn't hard, but we have the Terapagos option completely taken away from us because they have that pivot opened up. Now, in the interest of time, I am going to talk about the other 3 top 5 meta decks right now. I did talk about Raging Bull and utilizing the Crown Opal into it, so I figured I might as well save another few minutes since I yapped about the deck a lot, since this definitely was an intricate one. And we'll talk about Gholdengo. Now, I mentioned it in the Joltik Box video. They do kind of get cooked by Resolute Heart Pikachu EX, so, you know, we should definitely utilize that most of the time. They really don't. I mean, some lists do play the Monkey Dory, but when you're using Pikachu's Resolute Heart, you're not leaving any damage on the field for them to actually take advantage of. So there really is no way, if that's all they're using, for them to get around the Resolute Heart. So you could easily take out, you know, extra prize cards with the Pikachu as long as you use your Sparkling Crystal well. And then, you know, you can only just discard 2 energy and still use the attack because that's how Pokemon works. You don't need the full discard 3 if you've only got 2 energy to utilize the attack, because once you use the attack, every effect of the attack comes into play naturally, so you just discard up to 3 energy that you have. Now, of course, if you have 3, you must discard them, but if you only have 2, you just get rid of those 2. So double Crispin, Sparkling Crystal, and a Pikachu EX can walk through Gholdengo. Now, Dragapult Dusknoir is slightly favored, and that's because many times they have to use the Dusknoir to take out our Hootoots or our, you know, Fan Rotoms and stuff like that, which does give us a prize card and could potentially help us pull off Briar, but more importantly, we still have Clefairy, Latias, and Mew for them to deal with, and now with their new weakness in play, we can swing for Oko. We don't mind the damage counters on the bench too much because they don't do that, you know, they're not that effective at any one point on taking a prize card. Against Dragapult Dusknoir, or really any Dragapult variant for that matter, it's very important to save your 80 HP Hoothoot for the mid-game because it has 80 HP. And I know people are definitely thinking when I was talking about the deck, like, oh, why the 80 HP one? Why are we playing the 1-0 Volt? The Dragapult is why. If they play Hawlucha plus Phantom Dive, they can combo a 70 damage bench attack in one turn. So if we really need Hoothoot in the mid-game, you know, to be benched, we want to save that 80 HP one for that play specifically so that now Hawlucha Phantom Dive damage counters don't KO, and we could go into Noctowl the following turn and pull off our closing play, ideally. Grimmsnarl is going to be represented by a 46% win rate, which is one of the rougher ones as far as top 5 decks go, but it is one that is very easy to tech for. I think right now a lot less people are playing Grimmsnarl than they have before, so, you know, people are opting to not run the Leafeon, and especially the Iron Leaves in this deck because it doesn't hold the same value. I think if this is a matchup that becomes popular again, this is one we could see shift greatly to a good or even auto-win matchup, depending on the attackers needed. So I wouldn't sweat this one too much, and if you know your locals are playing a lot of Grimmsnarl, well, you've got 2 great grass attackers we've talked about to utilize to just absolutely destroy them. The rough matchups are Dragapult Charizard, which, I mean, Charizard is going to be difficult, man. Another matchup where we could see Iron Leaves being a very, very crucial one of in the deck, more so than the Leafeon, because we'll have the Lillie's Clefairy to deal with the Dragapult side of the deck, and the Leafeon, or the Iron Leaves, excuse me, to deal with the Charizard side of the deck. At its current build, and the one I'm showing off today, I think this is a little bit harder in the rough matchup because, well, you really just have the Teal Mask Ogerpon to swing for Oko on those Charizards. Other than that, they're going to be utilizing Monkey Dory a bit more efficiently, so Pikachu isn't going to be your best friend here, but an option like Gravity Mountain could be considered if this is, again, another deck you expect to see a lot of. Now, Guardy is a 41% win rate because, I mean, this deck just has too many basic Pokemon they get set up too consistently. And unlike Ethan's Typhlosion, which is dominated by them, they could go into Gardevoir plus Monkey Dory and take Okos with a big attacker that we can't do much about. So, you know, this is going to be a bit of a rougher matchup at 41% win rate. Again, the Wellspring Ogerpon will be your best friend in the early game, especially if you could take down 2 Ralts before they could really get them evolved with the TM Evo. You will be sitting in the world's best spot. But we don't have Iron Hands like Joltik Box does to continue that 2-prize pressure. So when they inevitably take out the Wellspring Ogerpon, you're kind of stuck in a situation where you've got a bunch of 2-prize attackers, and unless you can pull off Fan Rotom multiple times to, you know, balance that prize trade, and they miss a Gust KO on your 2-prize Pokemon, it's going to be pretty hard to walk away from that one. Now, our auto-loss matchup at a 30% win rate is Ethan's Ho-Oh. While this deck is basic dominated, which you would assume you could crown Opal, they play the Roaring Moon with Frenzied Gouging, and we are most definitely not playing a Mist Energy here, so we don't stop that attack from occurring. By ripping through our deck with cards like Roaring Moon, the Iron Hands, and even Ethan's Ho-Oh, which could swing for good damage against, you know, different Pokemon and heal their bench up in different scenarios, it's going to be difficult. And if push comes to shove for them, well, they still have a copy of Wellspring Ogerpon. So while we could abuse that against their Armarouges, they could also abuse it against our Noctowls and limit our bench even, our engine even more. I apologize for that being an insanely quick matchup spread. I really didn't expect my deck breakdown to take so long. I just think this was a really hard deck for me to conceptualize, so I needed to take more time to explain all of the cards and their use in it. So for now, we'll just jump to the master ranking, and of course, if you guys need an extra short on a matchup or two, just let me know in the comments down below, and I'd love to give a little 3-minute guide into whatever matchup needed. But of course, we have the master ranking last up. The price of this deck is dominated at an 8 out of 10. I mean, this is a pretty cost-efficient deck, and you get a ton of staples for it. Now, from my understanding at the time of this recording, there's really only 3 cards that break the $5 mark. One of them is Fezandipiti, which is the most expensive card at like $15 to $17. That one's pretty pricey, but that is a staple in like 90% of decks, so it's not like it's a waste of money. Other than that, the entire deck could be bought for another $40 after the Fez, so it is a very cost-efficient deck at the power you get from it. And I think it's worth investing because, again, just like Joltik Box or, you know, many other like basic EX decks, there are so many staples that are just so useful in this deck, such as the Crispin, the Mew, the Pikachu, the Bloodmoon, the Lillie's Clefairy, the Latias, even the Noctowl engine with Fan Rotoms. I mean, they're just so useful to have at any moment. I feel like this deck's price is phenomenal. The consistency of this deck is a 7 out of 10. While you do have such a good search engine with Noctowl, it is not hard for your opponent to sometimes snipe those off the bench with their own Wellspring, or kind of gust around those, or put you in situations where you need 3 cards and you can only Noctowl for 2. While that seems like a lot of ways to work around Noctowl, it's still a phenomenal search engine, and unlike Pidgeot, it's just a single prize one, so it definitely has a 7 out of 10 consistency, and oftentimes you can pull off whatever combo you need to get ahead in your matchup. The power level for this deck is also a 7 out of 10. This deck can swing very hard with Pikachu EX, and it also can swing onto different Pokemon with the Wellspring Ogerpon, allowing you to consistently be taking 2 prize cards, and with many other Pokemon such as Teal Mask Ogerpon and Lillie's Clefairy, allowing you to diversify the weakness effect that many cards have. I mean, you've got some solid power. Now, this damage is not infinite, so I would not give it like a 9 or 10 out of 10 like I would for a deck like maybe Golden Go or Raging Bull. result, it still has amazing power and should definitely not be slept on because it can 2-4-6 you before you can breathe, especially when you can take into account Briar, which can help with this deck's power level in the late game a ton. The speed of this deck is one of the best parts of this deck at an 8 out of 10. I mean, this deck loves going first to get the Noctowls down, and my god, does it love going Wellspring Ogerpon before you can evolve anything. So this deck will utilize its own speed over your opponents as a way to overwhelm you and put you in a difficult spot. The versatility of this deck is most definitely a 10 out of 10. There are few decks that can adapt to any deck being a top dog like this one, and I think while it does fall off in some of the power levels and maybe consistency levels at points, which has made it a bit of a rougher deck to play, that should not take away from the fact that this deck has a way to evolve or change a certain attacker to help with its matchup spread into different decks. The base skill level needed to pilot this deck at an optimal level is a 5 out of 10, and I think that's where this deck falls short for the wide majority of players. This is a very hard deck to understand and see the lines for and pull off when you're in the middle of the game with all the pressures of being in an in-person tournament or even an online tournament or ladder play. It's a hard one, and I think that doesn't necessarily hurt the deck. I think hard decks don't necessarily make the deck better per se, but I think if you gotta understand a deck like this and play it at that optimal level, I mean, it's gonna be a very hard one to take down. So the base skill level is gonna be a 5 because I feel like not everyone is going to be able to pick this up and just run and obliterate opponents like they could with something like Golden Go or Joltik Box. This one is going to take a lot more thought beforehand, and you're going to have to understand the theory, matchups a lot to conceptualize how you pull off certain plays, as well as prize mapping, prize checking in a timely manner. There's a lot of other skills that are going to lower this deck's base skill level needed for optimal play. The matchups this deck has are easily a 7 out of 10. This deck has a great matchup spread overall. I think there's a lot more 50-50s than anyone would like. But with the lack of rough and auto loss matchups, it's really hard to knock this deck's matchup spread. Guardy being in the rough matchup spread is obviously not what people want to see right now since it just took down Worlds, but I think it makes up for it with all the other good and auto win matchups that we're seeing for Tera Box overall. This would leave with the deck, and this would leave the deck with an overall 7 out of 10 master ranking. I think this deck is a phenomenal pick to many local challenges, League Cups, and should be one that you consider for different regional or higher level play past the local level, because this deck's power level is insane and its adaptability and versatility into the meta is amazing. So when you're up in a regional or League Cup and you're seeing a wider variety of many top decks and some rogue decks that are much more refined, I think this deck has many different answers and should be respected. And if you're not considering playing it, you should definitely know about it because it's going to be a hard one for you to navigate as well. I hope that this helped everyone learn something more about Tera Box, since this is a deck we have not seen in a very long time. This video was a ton of fun to make, and I apologize again for spending so much time in that first part of the video. If there's any matchups you guys need me to go more in-depth on or explain, I'd love to make a quick short for this channel or my competitive team's channel, Draw Past TCG. Shout out to them. Go check out the channel. And yeah, I mean, let me know what decks you guys want to see next. I would love to get after it and, make a Master the Meta video on them. So if there's anything you want to see or anything you enjoyed about this video or think I could improve upon, it is only my third Master the Meta. So please let me know in the comments down below. And with that being said, I hope everyone's doing awesome. Stay epic. Peace.